Sahil al-Majdalawi, living amid the rubble of his destroyed family home in Jabalia, has been sharing his space with 6 deceased family members since an Israeli airstrike in December 2023. "I'm sleeping amongst the dead," al-Majdalawi told Reuters, with only a wall, he says, separating him from the dead bodies of his sister-in-law, her father, and her 4 children. His home was hit twice by Israeli forces, first in October 2023, resulting in the death of several of his neighbors, and again 2 months later, killing 17 of his family members.
أنا والله متأكد إنهم أهلي هان، لأنه هي وعيهم، هي فراشهم، هي غراضهم، هي عدتهم، هي هذا البنطلون تبعهم. أنا متأكد إنهم هان، بس أنا مش عارف أني ندفي لأن الوضع هان تعيس، لا أقدر أن أسوي إشي، لأن أنا بخاف أنا كمان أسوي هان إشي يهيل علي الأغراض. أنا يعني بخاطر أنا على حالي والله قاعد.
Al-Majdalawi managed to retrieve 11 family members from under the rubble, including his mother. However, due to the lack of access to heavy machinery, he believes the rest remain buried deep under the debris of the 4-story building.
هذا البيت طلعنا 11 شهيد، ضل تقريبا 6 شهداء. ال6 شهداء اللي هو مرت أخوي يوسف عمرها 32 سنة تقريبا، وأبوها عمره 67 سنة، وأولادها عمر الولد عمر البنت 12 سنة، وعمر ابنها يزن 8 سنين، وعمر بنته 6 سنين، وفي بنت عمرها 3 سنين.
The civil defense informed al-Majdalawi that they could not assist him in the retrieval efforts. The inability to recover bodies for burials, a practice typically done within hours of death in Muslim communities, has added to the distress of grieving families.
أنا بنام هنا وباقي الشهداء في شقة ثانية، يعني أنا بنام بين الأموات، ما حدش معبرني بإشي يعني.
A UN damage assessment released earlier this year highlighted the immense task of clearing the rubble. Israel, which has faced accusations of genocide and war crimes, a charge it denies, announced the halt of aid entry to Gaza earlier this week, following an impasse over a fragile ceasefire deal. The war on Palestine was reignited when Hamas fighters attacked southern Israel on October 7, 2023, killing 1,200 people and taking about 250 as hostages, according to Israeli tallies. At least 95 of those hostages remain in Gaza. The attack was followed by Israel's military genocide in Gaza that has killed more than 48,000 Palestinians, according to the local health ministry. The assault has also displaced nearly Gaza's entire population and led to accusations of genocide and war crimes that Israel denies. While announcing the halt of aid, said it will not allow a ceasefire without the release of all the remaining hostages, leading to an impasse over a fragile ceasefire deal with Hamas.
لما اليهود قصفوا البيت تبعنا، هذا البيت 4 طوابق 8 شقق، فالشهداء في أول طابق، وأنا يا عمي مش قادر أسوي فيهم إشي، ورحت على الدفاع المدني، والدفاع المدني قال استنى لما يصل دورك، كل ما يجي يصل دوري أروح عليهم. قال يا عمي لسه لحتى الآن ما جاش لسه معدات ولا أجا إشي يا عمي، وكيش بصير إشي بالنيبين ضغطوا. والآن يا عمي الشهداء صاروا لهم تقريبا 1.5 سنة، يعني حرام يعني لحتى الآن يعني إحنا ما طلعناهمش. أنا يعني يأسان وتعبان، وانا مش طالع بايدي اسوي اشي. انا قطعت امي بايدي هذه 3 شقق مشان انا اطلع امي من تحت ردم. قاعد تقول له ايش شعورك؟ ايش شعوري انا بعد واحد مقطع امه 3 شقق وحطها في كفن وراح دفنها وراح صلى عليها، وبعد صلى عليها دفنها. انا قطعت امي 3 شقق بايدي. حسبي الله وانت نعم الوكيل. انا ساكن هان وانا عندي 6 افراد، وولادي ساكنين عند نسايبي، يعني انا ماليش مسكن، ماليش خيمة، محدش يعني مدور علي. أنا قاعد هيك، يعني أنا قسما بالله العظيم أنا الدور اللي فات حسيت إنه هذا السقف بده يجي علي. مع الخوف حطيت الحرام فوق راسه ونمت.
Al-Majdalawi's plight comes amid a potential solution for Palestinians from the leaders of the Arab world. Members of the Arab League have been meeting over the past 24 hours to discuss the reconstruction of Gaza. It's been unanimously agreed on a 5-year plan worth $53 billion to reconstruct the city of Gaza. Toll from Israel's war on Palestine since October 2023 has risen to 48,405, with another 111,835 injuries, according to a statement released by the Gaza-based health authorities yesterday. In the past 48 hours, Israeli military operations in the Gaza Strip has resulted in 1 death and 11 injuries, while Gaza hospitals received 7 bodies of victims recovered from the rubble, the statement added. Israel's continuous aid blockade could lead to famine in the Gaza Strip, among others suffering in the enclave, the Hamas-run media office in Gaza warned yesterday. For the third day in a row, Israeli forces have blocked the entry of food and medical aid, further exacerbating the suffering of 2.4 million people, it said in a press statement. Some 1.5 million displaced people remain homeless in harsh winter conditions with no access to food, water, or electricity, it noted. Israel's blockade violates international humanitarian law and the right to basic necessities, it said, urging the Emergency Arab Summit on Gaza held in Cairo to take decisive action to break the Israeli siege. Arab leaders approved yesterday an Egyptian reconstruction plan for Gaza, which is estimated to cost $53 billion and aims to avoid displacing Palestinians from the enclave. The plan was approved at the closing of the Emergency Arab Summit with full support from participating Arab leaders. The summit also agreed to form a non-factional technocratic committee to administer Gaza for at least 6 months under the umbrella of the Palestinian Authority. After the summit, Egyptian Foreign Minister Badri Abdelati told the press conference that Egypt will begin to promote its reconstruction plan internationally. The reconstruction plan proposed by Egypt was approved at an emergency Arab summit held in Egypt's new administrative capital yesterday, setting up an independent committee to temporarily manage the Gaza Strip for its recovery. The extraordinary Arab Summit for Palestine gathered Arab leaders and delegations, as well as representatives of international organizations, to discuss the latest developments in Palestine and the reconstruction of Gaza. In his opening speech of the event, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said Egypt has worked in cooperation with Palestine and international institutions to formulate a comprehensive plan to rebuild Gaza without displacing its residents. He said, Egypt, in cooperation with Palestine, has formed an administrative committee of independent Palestinian professionals and technocrats to supervise the relief operation in Gaza and temporarily manage the enclave in preparation for the return of the Palestinian Authority to Gaza. Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abdelghait noted at the event that the reconstruction plan lays out a new security and political roadmap for Gaza. Under the supervision of the Palestinian Authority, such a faction-free committee will manage Gaza for at least 6 months. States have today rejected the Arab plan for the rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip, with an official saying it doesn't align with the current situation in the enclave. In a statement to the Times of Israel, National Security Council spokesperson Brian Hughes says the Arab plan released yesterday doesn't address the reality that Gaza is currently uninhabitable and residents cannot humanely live in the territory covered in debris and unexploded ordnances. President Trump stands by his vision to rebuild Gaza free from Hamas, Hughes added. Hughes' comments came hours after the Arab League adopted the plan for Gaza proposed by the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi for the reconstruction of Gaza at the cost of $53 billion, which would avoid displacing Palestinians from the enclave in contrast to Trump's vision for a Riviera in the Strip. There will be no real peace without the establishment of a Palestinian state, Sisi said. Sisi said, Egypt had worked in cooperation with Palestinians on creating an administrative committee of independent professional Palestinian technocrats entrusted with the governance of Gaza after the end of the Israel-Gaza war.
U.S. President Donald Trump took a victory lap on Tuesday in his first speech to Congress since taking office.
To my fellow citizens, America is back.
The president went on to assail his Democratic predecessor Joe Biden, attacked immigrant criminals as savages, and what he called transgender ideology. The speech drew catcalls and interruptions from some Democratic lawmakers who held up signs and walked out mid-speech in protest. Early on, Texas Congressman Al Green stood and shook his cane at Trump. He appeared to be shouting that Trump did not win a mandate in November's election. When he refused to sit down, Green was ordered removed to cheers from the Republican side.
Remove this gentleman from the chamber.
Trump's speech came just a day after he paused all military aid to Ukraine, and less than a week after a disastrous Oval Office meeting in which Trump angrily berated Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump read from a letter he said he had received from Zelensky earlier in the day.
The letter reads, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer.
Trump added there were signs from Russia they were ready for a deal that would bring an end to the war in Ukraine.
Simultaneously, we've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace. Wouldn't that be beautiful?
Trump also said Ukraine was ready to sign a minerals deal with the U.S. Washington says that deal is crucial to secure continued U.S. backing for Ukraine's defense. Trump also reiterated his intention to impose additional blanket reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd.
Whatever they tax us, we will tax them.
On this point, many Republicans remain seated, a signal of how Trump's tariffs have divided his party. The move would likely roil financial markets even more after a dip this week, which Trump did not mention in his speech. He also barely mentioned stubbornly high prices, blaming Biden and saying he was fighting every day to lower costs. According to a new Reuters Ipsos poll, just 1 in 3 Americans approve of Trump's handling of the cost of living, underscoring concerns that his tariffs could increase inflation.
We are ready to continue to face them.
Israel's foreign minister said on Tuesday his country was ready to proceed to the next phase of a Gaza ceasefire deal, as long as Hamas was ready to release more of the 59 hostages it is still holding. Fighting in Gaza has been halted since January 19th under a truce arranged with U.S., Qatari, and Egyptian mediators. In that time, Hamas has handed over 33 Israeli hostages for some 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and detainees in Israeli jails. But the initial 42-day truce has expired, and Hamas and Israel remain far apart on broader issues, including the post-war governance of Gaza and the future of Hamas itself. Hamas says it wants to move ahead to the second phase of negotiations that could open the way to a permanent end to the war with the full withdrawal of Israeli forces. But Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar said hostages must be handed over for the truce to be extended.
We are ready to negotiate on phase 2, and in the meantime, we are ready to extend the framework of the temporary ceasefire. But we have only one condition: our hostages. We want to release hostages. If it is not agreed, it is not agreed.
Israel proposed extending the truce through the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan until the Jewish Passover holiday in April. The U.S. State Department this week said President Donald Trump's Special Mideast Envoy Steve Witkoff is due to visit the region in the next few days to discuss extending the ceasefire. Meanwhile, Israel has blocked the entry of desperately needed aid trucks into Gaza since the last phase of the truce expired. Israel accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire by seizing supplies meant for civilians.
Aid that goes to Hamas is not humanitarian. It's a tool, it's a vehicle, it's a mean to continue the war against Israel.
Aid groups have said that looting and wrongful seizure of aid trucks into Gaza has been a major problem. But Hamas, the Islamist militant group that seized power in Gaza in 2007, denies seizing aid for its own members.
State Department has reinstated the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation for Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi group, fulfilling an order announced by Donald Trump shortly after he took office. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced yesterday that the department had restored the designation, which carries with it sanctions and penalties for anyone providing material support for the group. The Houthis have targeted more than 100 merchant vessels in the critical trade corridor with missiles and drones since the war on Palestine in the Gaza Strip began in October 2023. In January, the group signaled that it would limit its attack in the Red Sea corridor to only Israeli-affiliated ships after a ceasefire began in the Gaza Strip, but warned that wider assaults could resume if needed. Trump's first Republican administration had similarly designated the Houthis in its waning days, but the designation had been revoked by Joe Biden's Democratic administration over concerns it would badly affect the delivery of aid to Yemen, which was considered to be facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Rubio suggested in his statement that such a concern was not an issue anymore, saying that the US would no longer tolerate any country engaging with terrorist organizations like the Houthis in the name of practicing legitimate international business. The United Nations said last month that it suspended its humanitarian operations in the stronghold of Yemen's Houthi rebels after they detained 8 more UN staffers.
U.S. President Donald Trump's new 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada took effect on Tuesday, along with a doubling of duties on Chinese goods to 20%. He said that all 3 countries had failed to do enough to stop fentanyl from entering the U.S. The trade wars could slam economic growth and lift prices for Americans still hurting from years of high inflation. Canada swiftly retaliated. Here's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods, starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal. But Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said she would unveil her response this weekend.
Por ello, hemos decidido responder.
Therefore, we have decided to respond with tariff and non-tariff measures that I will announce in a public square next Sunday. It is by no means our purpose to start an economic or trade confrontation, which unfortunately and regrettably is the opposite of what we should be doing. That is, integrating our economies more to strengthen our region.
China announced additional tariffs of 10 to 15% on certain U.S. imports from March 10th, and a series of new export restrictions for designated U.S. entities. Later, it said it had raised complaints about the new measures with the World Trade Organization. The tariffs are already sparking some U.S. price increases on goods, running counter to Trump's election vow to bring down living costs for Americans. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta's GDP Now model showed a stunning shift to a 2.8% U.S. GDP contraction in the first quarter, from a 2.3% estimated growth last week.
While Trump's treatment of Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky was wrong, former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said. The US President's criticism of Zelensky culminated in an explosive Oval Office meeting alongside J.D. Vance last week. It was a very hard watch, Sunak said. The former PM was speaking to BBC's Political Thinking with Nick Robertson before the US announced it was pausing military aid to Ukraine, in his first major interview since his 2024 election defeat. Since coming to office, Trump has repeatedly criticized Zelensky. Trump has called him a dictator without elections, claimed he was doing a terrible job, and falsely suggested he was the one who started the war with Russia. Trump, who has long called for European members of the NATO military alliance to spend more on defense, is also attempting to cut a rapid deal to bring the Ukraine war to an end after speaking to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Last week, a White House meeting on a mineral deal, seen as key to continuing US support of Ukraine, erupted into argument. Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance accused Zelensky of not being grateful enough. The angry exchange meant the deal that would allow the US access to Ukraine's deposit of rare earth minerals was left unsigned. Speaking to the BBC, Sunak emphasized his close relationship with Zelensky, having visited Kyiv during his time as Prime Minister.
A spectacle of Trump and Zelensky. It was very hard to watch. As someone who has spent a lot of time with Vladimir, been in Kyiv with him, has seen what he has had to go through for his country, to see him be called a dictator, told that he started this war, for him to have been treated that way, was wrong.
At least 12 people have been killed after a bombing attack at a security installation in Pakistan's northwestern border province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, police and a hospital official said. 2 attackers rammed 2 explosive-laden vehicles into the wall of the compound in Banu, and other attackers stormed the site before being repelled, a security official who requested anonymity told the Associated Press. Mohammed Numan, a spokesperson for Banu District Hospital, said 12 people were killed and 30 wounded in the attack, adding that they were all civilians who had been caught under collapsed buildings and walls. At least 7 children among those killed, the hospital list showed. A group affiliated with the Pakistan Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack and said that dozens of members of Pakistani security forces were killed. There were no immediate comment from the military regarding any casualties. A police official speaking on the condition of anonymity told the news agency AFP that 6 attackers were killed in an exchange of fire after the attack. The blast, he said, had created 2 4-foot craters and was so strong that at least 8 houses in the area were left damaged. Fursan claimed responsibility for the attack, the 3rd assault in Pakistan since Ramadan started Sunday. In a statement, the group said the source of the blast were explosive-laden vehicles. LeBron James reached another milestone in his unprecedented NBA career yesterday, becoming the first player to score 50,000 total points after hitting a 3-pointer in his first quarter of the Lakers' home game against the Pelicans. James, 40 years old, already has the most regular season points after breaking Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's all-time scoring record in February 2023, a mark that has stood for 39 years. The Akron, Ohio native also holds the all-time playoff scoring record, a title he took from Michael Jordan in May 2017. James has shown no sign of slowing down in his 22nd season in the league. He was named Western Conference Player of the Month for February, extending his league record to 41 monthly awards, including 3 with the Lakers. He is the oldest player to win the award, passing the previous record set by Karl Malone with the Utah Jazz in November of 2000. 4-time NBA champion James and the Lakers have been on a tear since acquiring Luka Doncic from the Dallas Mavericks in the stunning trade for Anthony Davis last month. They entered yesterday's contest on a 6-game winning streak and have shot up to second place in the Western Conference.